Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello, wonderful people. This is episode number 197 of the Web Platform Podcast, where we're going to be talking a lot about modern HTML. I'm your host this week, Danny Blue, and with me, as always, is Eric Isaacson.
Hello.
Yep. So if you do notice Eric's audio quality, as with a lot of people at the moment, at this date, what's today, March 12th of 2020, a lot of companies are testing out some remote policies. So we're doing the best with what we have. Eric, how's it going?
It's going, working from home, testing the VPN. We might all be working from home soon.
Yeah, it is going to be a great test of a lot of companies' IT infrastructure.
Yes, definitely, especially in larger companies.
Yeah, so we will see. But yeah, so no This Week in Web this week. We'll check back up with that next week. We will just assume that all progress has stopped, and that's the only reason that there's nothing to report is because absolutely nothing happened. But yeah, so this week we did want to talk about a lot about modern HTML, and to help us talk about that, we have a very special guest, Dave Rupert.
Hey, thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you for being on. We really appreciate it. So for folks that might not be familiar with who you are or your work, why don't you give us, just a very brief background about yourself?
Sure, I can give you all the elevator pitch here. I'm Dave Rupert. I live in Austin, Texas, and I work for a company called Paravel. We're a 3-person agency consultancy based out of Austin, and I work with 2 of my best friends, Trent Walton and Reagan Ray, and we work with kind of large companies like Microsoft or Papa John's or Wired magazine, and kind of help them with their web experiences, things like that. And then I co-host Shop Talk. It's another podcast, competitor podcast here with Chris Coyer from CSS Tricks.
Oh man, I think it's not a competition. I think you win.
I feel it's
pretty good too.
Cross-promotional opportunity. So
yeah. No, yeah. So thank you very much for deciding to come on. I imagine that's where if people are thinking, it's like, where do I recognize that voice from? Well, that question has now been answered.
That happens a lot. I'll be at a conference and people will be like, "Are you from some podcast I listen to?" And it's like, yes, yeah. Unfortunately, sorry, yes.
Sorry to disappoint you. Yes, sorry. This is me.
It's me. This is what my meat bag looks like. I apologize.
Not just a disembodied head.
Yeah. And I was talking before, and I want other people to tell me if I'm crazy, but I think that Dave sounds exactly like the guy that runs the LGR YouTube channel. So I need other people to either verify that is true or tell me I'm insane.
I wonder what it is. I wonder if we're both from the same area or area of, I don't know, the country or something. I wonder.
It's straight. Your speech pattern is even the same.
It's
really freaking me out right now.
I have a few doppelgangers across the United States, and yeah, weirdly, everyone. If you search Dave Rupert, weirdly, all of us are fairly similar, Midwestern people. I live in Texas, but I was born Midwest, but Midwestern people, and one of us was a spy for MI6, and it has death warrants out for his murder. But I'm not that Dave Rupert. I'm the website one. So.
The website Dave Rupert. I do like the idea that there is just one Dave Rupert template.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the Dave Ruperts, we play acoustic guitar. We whatever, work in tech in some capacity. So
there's requirements.
Yeah, to be a Dave Rupert, there's fit the bill.
All right. Well, we're not talking about how one becomes a Dave Rupert. We want to talk about HTML, which oddly enough, I don't think is something that we have covered recently in I think some of the detail that we're going to get into it today. We all use it because it, we have to for the web, but I don't think we've talked about some of the intricacies of it and some of the cool things that it can do.
What cool things can it do?
Yeah.
Okay. HTML popularized. I don't think it was invented. Popularized by Tim Berners-Lee. It's markup, right? So it's a way to convey meaning through markup, and so that's what those little angle brackets do. They sort of basically give a structure to the code, and it's hard. It's not a lot to learn. There's probably like 100 elements you'd use like on a day-to-day basis, but a lot of people are like, oh, those 100 elements, that's too much. I'm just going to use divs and spans. But there's reasons why you don't do that. And it may not be so obvious now in this modern era. I think back in the day when you could like, if the style of your website was the HTML, like you figured out like why I have to write good HTML so that the document looks right. But nowadays, it's with frameworks and everything, like you can kind of, I can do like div class H6 with Bootstrap and it looks like an H6 tag, and that's great. But there's also, you lose it's semantic meaning, and semantic is a weird word, but it is, it's important. The idea that our code means something, it describes something.
So I think that's something that we kind of want to get into on this particular show. And you touched on it already, where you said you could, in theory, just use divs and spans and not worry about anything else. So you mentioned that in the past maybe you had to use the correct semantic element in order for your page to look right. But in today's modern world, if you're just building it, regardless of framework, or you're just writing an HTML file that's going to get displayed on somebody's browser, why shouldn't I just use divs and spans? Why should I care about what these other elements are?
Before we get into that, though, can we just like kind of back up and look at HTML like based off of SGML, right? And that was nothing that anyone knew anything about before, right? And I'm sorry to jump in, but but like with HTML, it's really easy to understand. Hey, this holds this thing, and it was a way to display documents. Like when the web was first popularized, it was to read information. It was to read content, and so there would be pages, and it was very much a print world that was being moved over into this, for better or for worse, trying to shove it into this screen. And so it was a very different world. And so HTML did all the formatting, it did all the structure, and it's how the browsers were able to look at things. And today we have all of these tools in React and Angular that generate this HTML with templates, and there was handlebars before, now there's JSX, and now there's all these different things. And it sort of gets lost as part of JavaScript. And so I just want to kind of clear that up before we get into divs and spans and things, so that people can understand the history of this, because now we're in a different place, and has that shifted, or the role of HTML, has that shifted or not? Is it still important? Is it not important? I know that's a big debate on your podcast as well, Dave. Like where what's the importance of JavaScript and HTML and CSS? I think you had a whole series on front end with that.
Yeah, I mean, so we had a thing about the I think Chris Coyer called it the Great Divide in a blog post, which created more division in some ways. But no, I think the idea is sort of like, what is front end web development? What does it mean to be a front end developer? And it's, do I do HTML? Do I do CSS? Do I do JavaScript? Do I do all these things? Do I like set up Apollo GraphQL endpoints? Is that's technically front end too, kind of, and so the burden of the front end is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And like you've said, I don't know that all like HTML has just been thrown out the window. But I do think like some of the nuance has maybe been lost as we start like just trying to check out these new experiences, or maybe people are getting into tech a lot quicker. It used to be you had to sit in a room in a basement for a bunch of years to like make websites, and then
so true.
you just figure it out. But now it's like, I have many friends who have done this, and it's really good for them, and I applaud them. But they just go to a code school, get a 6-month brush up, and then they have a career upgrade, and maybe they don't know everything getting into tech, and that's super totally fine, because I don't think anyone knows everything. But there's probably some like core learning, I guess, that maybe gets lost along the way. But again, this is all sort of speculative. I don't have any data on it, but I'd love to see data on it. But there is some stuff that's just lost. I mean, if you do a for loop or whatever, and you're spitting out whatever, you get a list of items from your database and you spit them out, and you're like, div item 1, div item 2, div item 3. Like, that's cool. Except that, HTML has this thing called a list, an unordered list and an ordered list. And so if you put things in an unordered list, you've actually like described the content better. And each of those item 1, item 2, item 3 would be more suited as a list item, like item 1, list item 2, list item 3. And the reason I'm saying it like that is because they're assistive technology, which just gets into accessibility. This is a whole other like box of worms. But you get into that, and when a screen reader comes across a UL element, it goes, list contains 3 items, item 1, or list item 1, item 1, list item 2, item 2, list item 3, item 3. This sort of like that structure of the content can really like help the user listening. Like if you came across just if you think about like you open a book, a paper book, and you're like, and it's like, they called me Ahab, blah, blah, like you're just like, okay, this is cool. It's going, but how long is it going to go for? Thankfully with a physical book, we can be like, oh, okay, 200 pages. Great. Like I'm only here for 200 pages. If you're on a screen reader, you're like, how long is this thing going to talk at me? I don't know. So there are things in that, I think like there's this apps versus documents sort of thing. And I tend to not buy into that, because the lines get very blurry for me to where it becomes unuseful. But things like announcing lists would be actually super helpful in any sort of application, whether it's a navigation or whatever, a list of what are widgets in the factory or something like that, like product SKUs or something. Like all that stuff is very still useful for at the core of HTML, the markup of HTML. So yeah.
Well, Dave, I hate to have to correct you, but I believe it is a can of worms.
Can of worms. I said bag. That was way
a bag and a box of worms.
I don't know. I've bought bags of worms too. It's okay.
I was like, okay, you go to the fishing store. What do they give you? They don't give you a can. They don't. They give you like a
look. I didn't say
styrofoam cup of paper. You're right, though. You're right.
Now I'm actually second guessing myself if it is can of worms.
I think it's can of worms.
I think it's can of worms.
Okay. Bag of worms. It's not bag of worms.
What it is definitely not is a unordered list of worms.
Yeah.
Which and so you've kind of hit on my earlier question about like why not use divs, for example, which I think is I don't even know what it means, but kind of the first HTML element that a lot of people end up using for common stuff. But I think you
think
kind
it
of
was
gave
for
it the
divider.
Divider.
Yeah, like as
Yeah,
a separation,
division.
like a block.
Yeah.
Well, it's news
But
to me. Learn
a
something
little
every day.
obscure though. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
and at one time, I think Netscape had the layer element or something like that, which is kind of a similar thing,
God.
but it was like absolutely positioned. I believe I forget though.
Back in the Dreamweaver days, I used to use layers all the time.
Yeah,
I was like, it was so useful to be able to like put it up, and then CSS sort of made that obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so cool but now I went back to it recently. I'm like, wow, I wonder if this still works in the browsers. No browser will recognize it as anything but a span.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, it was weird days back then. So,
yeah, but yeah. So I think you've already demonstrated why the semantics are important, because your markup and your HTML can portray meaning, which a bunch of divs in a row inherently doesn't mean anything, but an unordered list already is giving you some information about the thing that you're trying to display.
and there's other things too. I mean, if you were to like sketch out a website, let's do a desktop website. We're going to sketch it, right? So draw the header. Okay. You draw the header. All right. Draw the main content area. Okay. You drew the main content area. Draw the footer, right, of the website footer. Well, right there, I've already used 3 semantic elements: a header, a main, and a footer. And if you have those 3 things in your document, like just under your body tag, or they can be a little more nested, but like kind of hanging out in the rootish part of rootish, that's a word, the rootish part of your document, those are instantly become upgraded to accessibility landmarks, which if you've used like VoiceOver for iOS, it has a really good visualization of this, but you can use this thing called the web rotor or the rotor, and you can browse a website by landmarks if you're using a screen reader. So you're like, okay, so I don't want to dig through this whole stupid page with my screen reader. I don't want to have the whole thing read to me. I know what I'm looking for is in the footer. So using the web rotor, you can navigate by landmark, and then you go straight to the footer of the website, like the whole site footer. And like just by using semantic HTML, you've like unlocked navigation powers for non-sighted users. And that's pretty dang cool. Because if you think about like skip nav links and all that stuff like that, like those are still necessary and helpful, but you basically, just by using a little bit of semantics, you can like enable people to browse your content or your app or your whatever a lot easier. So it's kind of cool.
Aside from that too, I think it's very powerful for search engine optimization. Like, maybe not as much as assistant, but there are certain, content is king, right? You need content in certain areas, but if you have wrappers around that content, like headers for H3s or H1s, whatever, that's going to have higher priority. And nobody knows the exact algorithm that Google uses, or I don't even think people care about Bing, but
I'm sure somebody cares about Bing.
I use Bing, actually. Hey,
do you?
Well, you're on Windows now, so
I'm on Windows. If you use Bing, you get these things called Bing bucks, and you can trade them in for credit for Skype minutes. It's great. It's wonderful.
All of the things that you just said sound made up.
Bing bucks is made up. It's Bing rewards.
I gotta get these Bing bucks from my Skype credits.
Yeah, Bing bucks from my Skype credits. But you can actually get like Xbox Live. Anyway, I'm not gonna sell you on Bing bucks here, but it's
well, that's a little more enticing at least.
I'm not going to sell you on Bing bucks, but it is like I do use it to get like movie rentals for my kids. So when they're like, I want to watch Frozen 2, and I'm like, I don't want to pay for Frozen 2. I can play Frozen 2 and be a hero dad.
I do Yeah, I don't know. I think in your act of not selling me on Bing Bucks, you have managed to sell me pretty well on Bing Bucks. So,
Yeah, it's
thank
free,
you.
it's passive, and you're not. I don't ever. Maybe once in a blue moon, I'll go over back to Google and just say like, "Am I actually missing a good search term or something?" So it's rarely ever.
It's like needing to check your it's like needing to check your napkin math with a calculator.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, sure, this seems right, but let's make sure.
Yeah, there was early days. It was very heavily skewed towards Microsoft things. So you Google anything and you get like the Microsoft doc site. So in like,
Yeah.
Visual Basic like tutorials and stuff, and it was like, this isn't good, but now it's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing I brought up in this document that we're looking at, like with the JavaScript, all the things, right? So now we have, whether you buy into it or not, like documents, and then there's applications, very blurry line between the two. I definitely agree with that. But like, why not just let JavaScript, let the frameworks handle all this stuff? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think like they can, the Reach. I don't know if you've seen Reach, the React project. It's it's kind of like starting with a foundation of like, we want an accessible router. Like we want it to manage page focus correctly. There's Reach tabs. Like they want to just provide accessible tabs out of the box. And like, I think it's like doing a good job. I think Ryan Florence is kind of behind it. And I think they're doing a great job of like exposing where a JavaScript framework could actually make a huge impact on your site. Because I don't know, even old Dave Rupert is phones it in sometimes, and I didn't do the tabs right, and didn't set up all the tab roles and the ARIA expandeds and all that stuff. Wouldn't it be cool if that was just provided for you out of the box? Now, I think, as Dave Rupert, I want HTML. I want that to be in the browser. And I've said as much, but, I think it's cool when like, you could leverage a popular framework like React is out there. Well, let's have the community settle on using Reach tabs so that we're I guess, kind of have a common ground for accessible support. Now, does that happen? I don't know. I'm not like at scale. Are people like, oh, this is a better tabs, I'll spend my sprint moving over to it? I don't know that happens in real life, but maybe for some people are starting out,
Yeah, one of my frustrations with a lot of the frameworks is that, you have like an HTML file that gets sent over the wire, and then it has a div, one single div, and then the JavaScript injects all the things. And that, while very good for developer experience, it doesn't really, it causes other problems, because then if you want SEO content, for instance, you now have to use either a pre-rendering solution or a server-side rendering solution to make sure that the markup is generated. And that has all kinds of complications.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like you solved one problem, right? Like all these dynamic updates. I have to, I click the button and I want the heart to turn red, look, and I'm doing that 10 times. Oh, I need a framework to solve that problem. But then you're like, oh, now that I moved everything client side, this is great. But it's like rendering a little bit, the time to like first paint is a little bit slow. So now I got to do now I got all these problems. And then, and I don't know that it's all solved either yet. Or like, even if you get server side rendering in, it's like, okay, cool. And now hydration takes a really long time.
Yep.
This idea of like,
and lazy loading, like all the different loadable objects.
Yeah. And I mean, React is all trying to solve this too, with like suspense and things like that, where things come in kind of more on demand or as needed. And, but for me, the these frameworks, they're doing a good job. They're solving their customer concerns, but
Yeah.
for me, I'm like always on the quest for like the simplest thing possible, and it probably is bad. I would probably make more money if I just was like, I do whatever's cool. This is great, you know. But for me, I'm always on the quest for like what's the simplest thing possible, you know. And for me, it's like still server rendering whatever I can seems very helpful. Seems very smart, but what I'm ultimately looking for is like HTML with superpowers, and that leads me down like paths like web components and stuff like that, or even I don't know. I like Vue right now. Vue's ticks a lot of the boxes for me, but it is like a full VDOM based thing, and it can get pretty hefty if you npm install the right things. But I like the ergonomics of it, you know, which again, that's sort of like a terrible, I don't know, terrible reason. I don't know.
I mean, not really. I mean, like we have this conversation a lot about developer experience versus performance. But especially while we are starting to talk about frameworks, there's one kind of underlying piece that I wanted to talk about a little bit. So we mentioned briefly what HTML is, but then the way that a lot of people interact with HTML besides just writing an HTML file is the DOM. Can you help differentiate and help explain the difference between HTML and the DOM?
Yeah, let me try. Are you interviewing me for a job here?
Maybe.
So HTML.
There's actually no podcast.
Okay. Okay. This is a job interview the whole time. Okay. So like HTML is the markup you write, that you author. And the DOM is what, in my brain, what comes alive in the browser, sort of the tree of the, it's called document object model, but it's the tree of the document. So every single thing that is in your like visually painted on the screen is now represented in this document object model. It's a model of the document. And with the DOM, you get some kind of primitive tools like append child or remove child, or things like kind of JavaScript APIs that kind of manipulate that DOM, or you can traverse the DOM like query selector and find things. Those are sort of the two main operations, I think, like manipulate and traverse. But it gets a bad rap. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, DOM slow. And so there's this thing called VDOM, which React and Vue, and I'm not sure if Angular must use something like it, I would assume.
Angular doesn't use things like Angular and lit HTML don't use virtual DOM.
Okay. I didn't know if Angular did or not. But then there's even like testing, like if you're using like Jest or something like that, they'll use a JS DOM, so it's like this kind of sort of like abstraction or representation in JavaScript of what the DOM should be. And then it has the ability to calculate diffs and be like, okay, if this changes, then I need to go to the real DOM and update this, and so it gets kind of weird. So you have like the thing you write then turns into this sort of living manipulatable document. And then you use another framework usually or something to kind of manipulate that. You manipulate this virtual document that then manipulates the actual document. So it's a little weird, confusing, but did I explain it kind of okay? Or do you have better? Did I get the joke?
I think that's great. I don't have a great explanation or description of what the differences are. And I think the first time that a lot of folks run into a challenge understanding the difference is HTML attributes versus DOM properties.
Okay.
Yeah, where in HTML you can now let me see if I can at least do this one part. So in HTML you can have these different attributes on your element that are
Like
represented.
Anchor has href or download or something.
Yeah, exactly. And those can usually be like there's a name equals and then it's a string. And this part is only a string. It's very important that that's only a string for some people. But other than that, and then if you grabbed a reference to that object, so you said document.getElementById and you grabbed your element, there's an API for getting attribute values and setting attribute values. And you can get those values in and not. Also on your DOM object, you have JavaScript properties that exist on that object. Some HTML elements, and this is where I think some of the confusion comes in. Some HTML elements, and I can't remember, I think anchors might actually be one of these, where attribute maps directly to a property. So you can just say, okay, my anchor.href equals something. Or you can say my anchor.set attribute href and then set it to something else. But they are two different things. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this if we end up talking about web components anymore, because I think that also comes out a good bit there with what the difference is. But just that difference right there, like, was for me one of the first times that it kind of clicked that they are two different things. Like one is used to kind of generate the other.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like, I feel like we're talking about like rich web apps or something like that, like, and like when the DOM is born, now it's rich, and now you can set you have getters and setters and stuff like that. And you can get the href value or set it. I've had a lot of experience with the HTML media element, like video and audio players and stuff like that. And that's a whole host of weird things that come with it. Like you just audio, like whatever, query selector audio dot play, and it'll actually just start playing the file. And like it's weird. Or I guess play parentheses with the function. Like now you have special functions on certain elements and stuff like that. So it can get confusing. But it's rich.
I ran into a lot of issues with trying to match one-to-one properties and attributes. And so I came up with a few rules for myself that actually helped a lot. So like, for instance, attributes in, properties out, right? So a lot of people, if you don't really set kind of rules for it for custom elements, if we do get more into web components, then you can have some performance implications. You can have some, recursion that you don't necessarily want, some bad problems. So, because like people are, oh, why can't I just make an input, right? Like, and the input, you put a value in, and then if you do dot value, you get that value, right? But it can be pretty obnoxious. I play with stuff like where, okay, I have a property, I set a property on it, and then I have an attribute out where like an attribute is like output equals some JSON string. And that has some problems as well. So I don't know, it's a little difficult to kind of wrap your head around, I think, until you start playing directly with low-level APIs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, it can be, like I said, I think just like that one difference can make things like there's one more thing that you need to talk about. So I'm curious. So I have a question for both of you. So we're talking about HTML, and we're at the beginning we was like, oh, these are an example of some different elements, and there's quite a few that people are really familiar with. But Dave, you had said even before that there's a bunch, but I feel like there haven't been a lot of new HTML elements recently. So if you've been doing this for a little while, like HTML5 introduced things like header, footer, main, some other pieces like that. But I can't think of an enormous number of new HTML elements versus a lot of new JavaScript APIs that have existed. So like it. Do we think there's a reason for that, or am I just missing them and they're all out there and wonderful and I just don't know what they are?
I think you're right. There hasn't been a lot, but with HTML5, that was how long ago too, right? Like we just found out when we had Brian Cardell on last time that, at least I did. I was like, wow, that's crazy that summary details has been around forever. Like it's been around a long time, and I thought that was fairly new.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on it, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, so Jeremy Keith has a really good talk on this right now. It's called Building, and he cites this book, How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand. And in there, Stuart Brand talks about these things called shearing layers of a building, right? And the outside of your building, or like the foundation of your building, right, is not going to change that much, or the outside structure of your house probably isn't going to change that much, but maybe the color, the skin will maybe kind of change a bit faster than the foundation of the color of your building will change faster than the foundation of your building. But then you go inside the walls, and like, walls can get painted and move a bit. The pace of change as you go inwards changes quite a bit. And Jeremy kind of flips this around and says like the speed of HTML is very slow. Like it's very stable and just very, very slow moving. The speed of CSS is a little bit faster than HTML. It moves a bit quicker, but then the speed of JavaScript is just like blistering. It's light speed because it's, you have a lot of these low level tools. They're a little bit easier to add and get consensus on. And then you just like spin up these new APIs, these new device things show up like geolocation or something like that. And that work just takes off and explodes. And the ecosystem, the frameworks around that, they just explode and take off and it just moves and moves and moves and moves. I tend to think of that as sort of the truth. I think I'd heard it from Brian too. Like the main element, I think, even though it was spec'd, I think with HTML5, it was debated and then it was dropped and then I think it was added back in. But it took 10 years to implement in every browser. 10 years for a fancy div, basically. That's a very long time.
Yeah.
For a fancy div. So the pace of HTML moves very slow. And like, what has changed? Not much. I mean, we got the picture element, and that was like quite literally like brute forced in by some developers. We paid Advice money to implement it in WebKit Chrome, and thankfully it landed or got the attention. And there was enough author demand for the picture element that it got in. But really, that's it. I think for the last 5 years or something, maybe that was 2014 it landed, but that was like brute force. We're adding this element to HTML. So yeah, the HTML moves a lot slower, for better or for worse. And I've been in conversations here about potentially adding new elements and things like that. Brian Cardell, again, who y'all had on the show recently, had talked about the possibility of like a panel and panel set, sort of like tabs or accordion or something. He had like proposed
some fun demos for that too.
Yeah, it's like a demo or built it out, like I think in a browser or just to see how it'd work or whatever, or web component. And it's pretty cool. I'll take it. Like if that's what it takes to get tabs in the friggin' browser after 30 years or whatever, I'll take it. But it's just kind of, I don't know. I think if people are hesitant to move HTML forward, but then on the other side, here's the crux or the I don't know, the antimatter to this. Chrome last summer tried to I don't know if you remember the whole Toast incident.
Oh yes.
Yep.
So Chrome,
But not everyone does.
not
So,
everyone
go
does.
ahead.
I'll give hopefully the short version here. Chrome has had a new plan, and it was we're going to they sent out an intent to implement a element called Toast, standard Toast, and so I say standard Toast because basically what it was a web component that lived inside the browser, so it shipped like a native web component. And I guess the idea is if you had to polyfill it, you could polyfill it from a whatever code.google.com or something like that. But they send out an intent to implement this thing, and the way you would use it is like import like std : toast, and that's it. Like you basically import a feature from the browser, like a totally like private API. Well, they sent out the intent to implement, which now is called intent to prototype, which is so much better. But they got a lot of backlash, like probably an unproportional amount of backlash. But part of it was because that repo for standard Toast and standard switch, and if the switch is like the toggle button, like a Boolean button, like on or off switch, that's pretty popular in design systems. They had sent that out like 2 weeks before they'd put the repo up, and they put a message in the like web incubators community group, and then they're like, we're going to implement this. And I think the internet was like, hold on, what's going on? This is right after the news that Edge was going to switch over to Chrome. I think a lot of people are like, what? This is a power play. What's going on? And like, who cares about Toast? What is a Toast? Oh, it's some material design thing. This is the proof of the demonic influence of Chrome's and AMP's power grab for the web. Like it was proof of that. And I actually I had both those concerns. So I think if you decouple each of those things, like the standard element inside a browser, do we need a Toast element? And then how can we ship things faster? I think there's three things at play. Those three things, like is having like standard set of web components like in the browser that can be accessibly vetted, and maybe they're written in JavaScript so they can get better a lot faster. That would be cool. Heck yeah, I'm into that. Do we need a Toast element? I don't know. I'm maybe not because I think Scott O'Hara pointed out we have the output element already, which already has all the ARIA stuff you'd maybe want. You just need to style it. And then, maybe, I don't know, but then should elements ship in 2 weeks? Now there's a good question. I think 2 weeks is maybe too fast, but 10 years is too slow. So is there a medium time that we can build an element in and get a bit of consensus? So I think me personally, I'm saying, I think Chrome was trying to pilot a fast path for elements. And I think that's fair for them to pilot, but I think they got burned and scorned, and now they don't want to do that ever again. And they'll stop proposing HTML. So that's sort of where we're at, unfortunately. So
I think it's good though that HTML goes slower. Like with design systems move pretty quick too. Like how long ago was it that the hamburger menu was like a cool thing? So like, would you have a component for that?
Yeah, but tabs. Let me go back to Dave's thing about tabs. Like there are still what is it? Tabs and virtual lists.
Yeah, and on mobile though, tabs you'll have like what, 2 or 3 probably. So it's not that bad. But like once you have to scale that, like I could see it. I don't know.
Yeah, but like I think there are, and I think that's where this is kind of a very simmered down version of that entire discussion. But it is that do we need Toast? Well, probably not. Like this seems to be a very Google specific thing, and so like those are obviously very valid concerns. The fact that we don't have an agreed upon virtual list, which almost every website needs. Well, I'm not going to say that. I retract that statement, but it's very useful for a lot of websites. I think is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And there are some basic building blocks that right now on the web you just don't like. We talked about the detail and summary thing that we talked about with Brian. Like, that's amazing. That like the next time I get that type of interaction in a design, I'll be like, I got it. I just need to sprinkle a little bit of CSS on here, and I'm good, and it's done.
Yeah.
And it's over. That's awesome. But like, it would also be nice if there were a few more foundational pieces to do that, so that I don't have to keep making tabs, or that there aren't a million tab implementations and one in every framework and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Greg Whitworth, who's over at Edge, and some of his team, they've started this group called open-ui.org. And they gave me a pitch on this a little while ago, so it's fresh in my mind. But they have this thing called a component matrix on their little site. Hopefully y'all have show notes and open-ui.org, and then click component name matrix. And they're going through, and this is part of the work that they are doing with Chromium, and like fixing all the form elements and giving a styleable select and things like that. Like they're trying to improve all that, but this is all part of that work, I think. But it's basically a research arm, and they're going through every design system or very popular design systems, and they're documenting it. So if you click this, I think it's like sort by component name. If you click it, and you'll get sort by match count. And so now you can see like how popular these controls are per like every design system. And you go to the top. 100% of design systems in this, like of these like 10 or so design systems, have a button. 71% have breadcrumbs. Well, that's cool. I mean, I can write breadcrumbs, but if 71% of design systems have breadcrumbs, maybe we need a breadcrumb element. 71% have a custom checkbox that they've styled. 64% of them have tabs. So maybe we need a tabs element. 57% have tooltips. Maybe we need a tooltips element. 50% have forms, which that sounds low, but for a design system to not have forms, but whatever. But like 50% have a slider or a card, an alert, which that is actually probably more like the toast component. It's like a dismissible alert. So now we're back to maybe we need a toast if 50% of the things need it. Modal. There's technically dialogue in HTML, but it's got accessibility problems. So you probably shouldn't use it right now, but hopefully one day you could. But like, we need a modal. Icons, or I don't know, just use SVG in my book, but whatever. Drop downs, like, drop down is a terrible word because it's like, people call it popovers, pop ups, pop unders, pop arounds, pop left, pop right.
Pop up and get down.
Yeah, some kind of drop down mechanism, because apparently you can't use details and summary for everything. I've learned. And then a menu, which is probably like a context menu kind of thing. Anyway, I'm just reading a website now, but like, it's just this idea here. Carousel's on there at 36% too. But like, maybe we need like more primitives, and I think that's where this is kind of going, is kind of this idea, like, let's put all these design systems in here, let's audit everything, and then maybe we can build sort of a, what would you call it, like a blueprint for how a tabs component should work. Like, let's build a blueprint for this, and this will be kind of like a pseudo spec for how like a blueprint or a tabs component should work. And now we can write tests against the spec, and now Reach tabs or whoever, different components or like framework and libraries and things like that, they can now test against this pseudo spec. And maybe, just maybe, somebody could build a standard web component, and then maybe, just maybe, we get an actual HTML element. Again, I don't know what the future is, but like, I think that's the kind of intent of this, is like, maybe we can just research our way to new elements. So
do you know if OpenUI is taking historical like data for trending to find out like how this trends over the months and years?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, because like it's organized by by design system, like usage in a design system, but is it organized by like like, are people actually using this in their design system? If that makes sense. Like, sure, everything has a tabs component, or 64% have tabs, but how many tabs are there on a website? Like, like you're saying, it's probably like 2 or 3. But anyway, I don't know if it's doing like trendiness or whatever, because that Switch component is pretty trendy right now. iOS, whatever, it like brought it up first, and now Windows uses it and stuff like that. It's pretty trendy, but it's a fancy checkbox. Let's do it. Let's get it.
Let's make fancy checkbox.
Fancy checkbox, please.
So do we think that custom elements, not going to talk about the rest of the web component stuff, but just, do we think custom elements helps us in any of this? Because I like web components, but I'm not completely sure. Is it?
I think it helps for prototyping, but how do you get that out to people? I think that's where Open UI and companies like that or groups like that should.
Right, but I'm just saying, does it, for prototyping, does it make sense to say, if I had an idea for something that I wanted to be a standard or something like that, I could just do this, and so that people could get a better idea of what I'm looking at, and then we also get maybe a more realistic way of polyfilling some of this stuff as well. Let's say that Dave's fancy checkbox makes it into say Firefox is the first group to implement. If
I thought it was very useful. Like when to Dave's point, I'm sorry, but Dave's point when he was talking about picture is probably the newest element in HTML, right? The responsive images group that worked on that. If you look at the stuff that they had an actual element that they were able to demo and show, which was really nice. There was a custom element that you could go to the GitHub repo and you could look at and download. So I think it's helpful in that sense. Is that kind of what you mean, Danny?
Sorry, yeah, was on mute. But yeah, no, that is kind of what I mean. And the same type of thing that it seemed like maybe the Chrome team was trying to go for with this standard library of components that you could pull in so that they could ship them, so that you could get things out there to people quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Brian uses it for a lot of his stuff too.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think we need a mechanism like this, but I feel like a web component is like the minimum viable product or the proof of concept that you have something that's useful.
Yeah.
I created this library called Awesome Standalones, just for this idea of a standalone web component, something you can just drop into your project, whether one script tag to a unpackage or something, or or just you could just hot link some script or something like that. But there's things in here that would be very cool, like an input knob, or a knob instead of a slider. Maybe that's kind of fun. I use one called 2UP, and that's by Jake Archibald and I think Arrow Twist as well. Paul Lewis. But and it's basically you have the before after screenshot, like you see in the New York Times or something like that. This is pre-hurricane. This is after hurricane. Those elements are very cool. I would love them in HTML. It's cool. I can use them though before they would ever go through any sort of standardization path. So that's kind of nice to me. Now, do we need a 3D model viewer in HTML? Maybe not, but
maybe for WebGL.
Because if you've ever tried to check WebGL on a but would it WebGL but with WASD controls and stuff like that for video games built in, or even I'm thinking of a mobile gamepad or something where you have those ghost elements or something. Wouldn't that be cool? That would be cool actually. So maybe that's an option, but maybe one day we'll get those things. But it's sort of for me, it's I think web components are here and they're pretty good. it would be cool if we could like kind of scope out how things work with web components. So before we, I don't know, it gives us a progressively enhanceable pathway forward too. If you're concerned about that, you just install the polyfill for it. So.
Yeah, I'm with you though on that. On David, like you said earlier, even that you strive to get simplicity whenever you can, and I'm finding that like since I started working with web components, that's what I'm like really pushing for, and I finally got it to where I have no runtime dependencies on components, and I'm just pulling in raw scripts, and I'm able to get so much faster results and better UI in general. I'm really hoping that we can, have other pieces of the web kind of conform to that too. The simplest approach.
Yeah, no, I'm desperate for less bundling, less packing, and less. I don't know.
I'm not even using a bundler or anything. My dev dependencies are like all tests.
See, that's pretty
like
awesome.
I'm not even fablifying anything it's really awesome to see. Like, because I remember when I was learning HTML, it's like, oh, tables and hardly any CSS, and like JavaScript was like add event listeners.
So are you having success then building things entirely in web components, or are you hitting any kind of weird edges?
Mostly stuff that's outside of the technology, like adoption and people like not wanting to use like understanding that it doesn't replace React, right? Oh, well, I use web components or I use React. No, that's three separate things.
Yeah, just name of here's your web component in React is whatever function render web component -name or whatever. So
yeah, because people are like, oh, just pull in a library for that component, right? Pull in a component for that, and like not every application we do. I have a Vue application that I just started, right? But most of our applications where I work is all React, and that's why I try to strive for the simplest part. Is like, okay, well, if I can have some shared code that can be used anywhere there, let's do that. I like stuff like TypeScript. I like stuff like Apollo and working with GraphQL, but I'd rather work with dumb UI, as weird as that sounds.
Yeah, or I want to offload this work to the browser. Is sort of my
exactly.
Yeah. And if web components are an interim for that, that's awesome. I want to do that, but like I want to do less work, darn it. So let me do less work.
Dave just wants to go down to the store and get his box of worms and be done.
Yeah, there's a box of worms waiting for me down at the bait shop. Right. Bag of worms?
A container of worms, some sort. Pick your container.
Baker's dozen.
Yeah. A donut box full of worms. There we go. It's the title of the episode. HTML is a donut box full of worms. That's all right. All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much for being on the show. Like we said, these types of things are interesting to talk about, and it's always good to get other people's perspectives on things, which is hopefully why people listen to the show. So before we do officially sign off, is there anything, any last thoughts that you wanted to give about HTML? We've kind of gone all over the place, but I think that maybe demonstrates that it's at the same time simple and then all of a sudden gets very not simple. Any last thoughts on HTML or anything related?
I would if you're in the HTML camp, like be considerate of people who are in the other camp. And if you're in the more JavaScripty, I don't care about HTML camp, like I encourage you to learn a bit more about HTML, because there's elements like lists or input or header footer that really provide value for maybe not for you, the developer, but for the user. And so really encourage you to dig in and learn it. It's only like 100 things. So 120, 130 things. So you can do it. You got this.
An advent calendar of HTML elements, one a day.
There you go.
That's actually a great idea. Let me steal that idea.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah, I think that's great.
All right, Dave. If folks wanted to get in touch, if they had other questions about anything that we talked about today, or if they want to just follow you and see some of the other awesome work that you're doing, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, daverupert.com. I blog, Davatron 5000, DAVATRON 5000 on Twitter and GitHub. Don't use any of my GitHub projects, please. Thank you. And yeah, I'm on Twitter running my dumb mouth all the time. So hit me up there.
Awesome. Well, Eric, it's great talking to you as always. And and thank you everybody for listening. Hopefully you learned some cool stuff. We will be back with we'll be back later. Yes, this has been episode 197 where we talked a lot about HTML and HTML type things. So yeah, thanks very much and take it easy, everybody.